Hi everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Derek Yu. I'm the CEO of a company called PureStake, but we're most well known for our work on the project Moonbeam, which I'm here to tell you a little bit about, and maybe give some thoughts on privacy on Polkadot, because I do think Polkadot has a unique design space, and will create opportunities for new forms of privacy. So just to start things off, I wanted to kind of set the stage and get people in the Polkadot state of mind, and just maybe as a reminder to folks that might already know some of these things. I know there may be some new folks that are new to Polkadot that are listening in. So really, the core idea for me about Polkadot is centered around two concepts. One is specialization. So it's definitely, the Polkadot idea is the antithesis of there's going to be one big blockchain or one super fast blockchain that rules them all. The idea around Polkadot is there's going to be many of these things. There's no single best blockchain. And to that end, there's a substrate development framework that Parity has created that allows developers to create specialized blockchains, really purpose-built blockchains that are optimized for particular use cases, potentially privacy use cases. And then, so if you have substrate to create these specialized blockchains, Polkadot is a way that these different specialized blockchains can connect to each other. It provides a kind of a means for these specialized blockchains to communicate with each other under the same security umbrella. So that means that they can communicate with each other with high security. And so I really think those are the two really core ideas around Polkadot that sometimes I see people not really quite understanding. And it really is this idea of let's create this large design space by allowing developers to have the tools they need to create these specialized blockchains, but you can then rely on other chains to do things that you're not specialized in. So you kind of get this whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so the question is, okay, so where does Moonbeam fit in then into this, into that space? And so Moonbeam is one of the member blockchains of Polkadot. So it's one of these things called a parachain. And what we focused on specializing on is creating a full Ethereum implementation in Substrate. So we've used the Substrate development framework. We've created, in close collaboration with Parity, all the features you need to have a fully working Ethereum-like environment. So it was really the core feature set. And and that's even interesting in its own right. There's actually a lot of deployments that have already happened. A lot of, this is kind of part of the meta these days, right? That there are these EVM compatible blockchains that different protocols are expanding to or moving to. But I think that it deserves to the question deserves to be asked. Well, there's a lot of EVM compatible blockchains out there. So what is it that's interesting about Moonbeam? And I really think that the differentiator for Moonbeam, or the thing that's interesting about Moonbeam, is that because we're a parachain on Polkadot, because we're part of this larger system, we can offer functionality or support different kinds of use cases that a standalone EVM blockchain can't offer. So in particular, there's these native cross-chain integrations that we can offer that are powered by something called XCM. XCM is the kind of integration technology that is unique to Polkadot, that allows the different parachains on Polkadot to communicate with each other. And we'll talk more about that a little bit further on in the presentation. And so just to give some sense of who's building on Moonbeam, there is a growing ecosystem of projects, quite a number of them, either tools and infrastructure, DeFi, games, different kinds of community-oriented NFT projects. There's quite a lot of projects that are already deployed to Moonbeam, or Moonbeam's companion Kusama deployment called Moonriver. To give you some sense, the Moonbeam network has been fully operational for about 6 weeks now, but there's been really a ton of deployment activity even in that last 6 weeks, as the ecosystem is really coming to life and growing. And just to talk a little bit about who it is that's deploying to Moonbeam, really I divide this into a couple different camps or different buckets. One is, I would call this kind of the expansionists, right? So This is something that you see across different EVM blockchains these days, where I think Moonbeam is the logical expansion point for a multi-chain team if they're trying to get to Polkadot and have an EVM code base, right? So you might have a team such as SushiSwap, right? So the Sushi team is deployed to many EVM blockchains. If they want to have a deployment onto Polkadot, it kind of makes sense for them to work with Moonbeam because they already have this EVM code base that they can deploy to Moonbeam without any changes. And that gives them access then to users and assets on Polkadot. And so there's definitely a number of project teams in that category that are pursuing this, I call it an EVM targeted multi-chain deployment strategy. They're trying to deploy to as many EVMs as they can. On the other side, there's more of the kind of the Polkadot or Moonbeam native teams. These are teams actually that we're spending more time with these days that are really focused on Moonbeam and Polkadot as their primary deployment location. And but there are benefits. If for a number of reasons, it may be that building a parachain is not a good fit for their use case, and so deploying to Moonbeam, being able to use the Ethereum tech stack and all the tools that come along with it, if that's a better fit for their use case, then Moonbeam is a logical place for deployment there. And what we've seen is in particular in the DeFi and the NFT areas, these teams want to be, there's benefit to being in the same EVM as other teams for composability reasons and for reasons of being near where there's going to be a lot of liquidity and assets. So that's created a little bit of a network effect for us even within Moonbeam itself. And so that's just context around what Moonbeam is and some of the core features that we have. But I wanted to step back a little bit now and talk about deployment architectures, and then finally to bring it back around to some privacy concepts and how at least I'll pose the questions of how some of these concepts might play out within the Polkadot ecosystem. And so just to start here with a kind of a discussion of dApp deployment architectures, really I see this as an evolving situation where almost all dApps that were created to date, even like from Ethereum's launch to date, have been in this what I'd call this leftmost bucket, like a monochain deployment. And so what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that a developer targets like a specific blockchain. They develop a set of smart contracts, front-end dApp code, and then they're targeting a deployment to, say, Ethereum mainnet, right, or Moonbeam. And so really, it's just deployment with one blockchain in mind. That's most of dApp development, that's happened to date. And I think, in the context of there being, most of the activity being on Ethereum, if you rewind back a few years, that kind of made sense. As these new ecosystems are emerging, growing, it's quite clear that they're here to stay now. Then you get what I'd call this cross-chain. We touched on it briefly before, where a team might say, okay, one deployment is not going to be good enough for us now. We are going to take like our entire dApp, all the smart contracts in our dApp, and deploy it to n number of blockchains. So that could be, Ethereum mainnet, Polygon, BSC, Polkadot via Moonbeam. You could have some list of deployment destinations. And generally, the idea is that it's almost like you're porting, because you're taking the entire dApp that you have and just deploying the entire thing, onto different blockchains. That's certainly the case if you look at something like SushiSwap, like I mentioned before. The full DEX deployment is repeated on n number of blockchains. That's a little bit of where we are now, I would say. But where I see things going is into an architecture that I call native multi-chain. So what do I mean by native multi-chain? This is an architecture where you have different parts of your dApp are deployed onto different chains, or your dApp is basically spanning the functionality of multiple specialized chains, and you're creating one experience back to the user. And so I do think that this is something that we're at the very beginning of a shift in how dApps are built to take advantage of these kinds of native multi-chain architectures. And this kind of app is something that Polkadot is uniquely designed to support, because of this ability to create specialized chains and because of this ability for those chains to communicate with each other. And so I want to go through a few examples of this. And even though we're early, we can already see, see this kind of playing out. So the first example I wanted to talk about is something called that we call XC20. So XC20 is the name of a token standard that we have on Moonbeam and Moonriver. And the idea around XC20 is that it's kind of like an ERC20. It's a token representation, but by being a substrate-based asset, it can move using this XCM technology on Polkadot. It can move, these tokens can move to any of the parachains that are connected to Polkadot. And they can do that with high security, since all the parachains are operating under a shared security umbrella. But when these assets are on Moonbeam, they're accessible to the EVM that we have on Moonbeam. So they kind of appear like they're ERC20s when they're on Moonbeam. So this is the first of the XCM-based features that we've rolled out. It's currently in production on Moonriver and soon to be coming to Moonbeam. And we have a number of different integrations, both in place and in flight, to add more of these interoperable assets, these Polkadot native interoperable assets to both our Moonriver and our Moonbeam deployments. And so this is I think this is a good example of, you don't have to worry necessarily about where you started or where tokens are from. They can flow within the entirety of the Polkadot ecosystem to where they're needed or where they can be made useful. In our case, in the case of Moonbeam, there's a lot of DeFi protocols deploying. So we expect, a lot of these tokens to move to be able to be deposited into, let's say farms or lending and borrowing protocols and so on. So that's definitely one of the first use cases that we have around this interoperability. And I just wanted to go to a second example that's a little bit more advanced, as something that just actually launched last week on Moonriver, as another example of what a native multi-chain deployment could look like. So in this case, the example is the Lido liquid staking protocol. So they launched this on Moonriver to create the STKSM asset. So for those that aren't familiar, Lido is a protocol that allows you to create a kind of a derivative asset that represents a staked, asset. So if you have KSM on the Kusama relay chain, you can stake that KSM to get staking returns. So what Lido does is it allows users to hold a single token STKSM that kind of grows, right? It kind of has it's a staked version of the asset, but you'd avoid needing to go through the actual staking, like kind of all the staking steps yourself. This is something that is quite popular on Ethereum. They have an ST-ETH asset, and Lido has been moving to other prominent L1 ecosystems or L0 in the case of Polkadot ecosystem to create these like staking derivatives. And so we've been collaborating with them for some time now, and their first deployment just went live. And so the thing that's neat about this Lido use case is that they built a dApp that's on Moonriver. So they're using the Ethereum tech stack, smart contracts on Moonriver, Ethereum style smart contracts on Moonriver. But they also are using staking functionality on the Kusama relay chain, on the main chain that's part of Kusama. So that's where the staking is kind of happening of these KSM tokens. And so you can see here that this app that they've created actually spans multiple blockchains, right? There's some components that are running on Moonriver. There's some actions and things that are happening on Kusama. But the end user doesn't realize that, right? They're just interacting with Lido as one app. And behind the scenes, it's leveraging functionality from Moonriver and specialized staking functionality from Kusama. I think this is kind of the way of the future, and this is how apps are going to evolve, in my opinion, where the user is not really even understanding that there's multiple blockchains involved. They're interacting with one app, but then behind the scenes, you can kind of create or use specialized blockchains to do different functions. And even in the case of Lido, there's even stable swaps. Like for example, there's a Curve deployment into our ecosystem right now where you would also leverage other protocols in the EVM that are supporting this kind of DeFi use case. So yeah, I think this is a great example of this kind of native multi-chain application that's going to open a lot of design possibilities for dApp developers. And so just to speak about what this means in terms of privacy, right? So like, what forms are privacy going to take on Polkadot? Certainly they'll take familiar forms. So Tornado Cash-like, Aztec-like protocols that are designed around EVM. Those will be coming to Moonbeam. We've been in discussion with teams that are building these kinds of protocols. And so that's a familiar form, right? So there's within the context of the EVM, you have these privacy layers. I think the thing that's potentially more interesting is this possibility of having parachain native functionality that provides privacy, right? So imagine that there's a parachain that has privacy features in it. There are the team at Manta, I think we'll be hearing from a little bit later today, has such a system. And then the idea is that you can use XCM to transfer let's say tokens, to deposit them into this privacy parachain. The transfers of that token then are private, kind of like you would have with a solution like Monero or Zcash, right? You have these like private transactions, and then you can withdraw back to something like Moonbeam, afterwards, or someone else can withdraw back. And so, the interesting thing for me here is that there's definitely, you kind of have this ability to create a whole chain that emphasizes privacy features. That's the problem with that in the past has been that then you're kind of this island onto yourself. You're this like island that can't interact with anything. But by doing this in the context of Polkadot, you can interact with the other chains that are there. So this is something that I think is going to be a pretty interesting use case as more of these XCM channels open and as there's more interaction between chains. And in particular, this kind of privacy as a service, I'm interested in that idea that you can have a chain that's specializing in one thing and is providing it as a service to other chains. And so that's the kind of thing that I expect to see. I know I'm running towards the end of my time here, so I wanted to tie this back then to just the broader vision that I have and what I'm kind of most interested in when it comes to Polkadot. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's really quite unique in the ability that it provides developers to customize what these member blockchains look like. The team at Parity have gone to great lengths to provide the tools to basically create almost any blockchain that you want using Substrate, but then allow these different very specialized blockchains to talk to each other. So privacy is one kind of specialized blockchain that we already see. There's already teams developing these like on Polkadot. Moonbeam, we're specialized into this like smart contracts use case, but there's other kinds of use cases of other useful services for developers. So things like storage or identity or oracles or even Parathreads I'm pretty hot on as a way for Moonbeam developers to extend the logic of their smart contracts with with the kind of logic that you can run like as a chain. And so the vision I have is that these different services that evolve will really provide this like rich library of things that developers can use, so they can pick the different services that they want to leverage for their application, combine them in the context of of Polkadot or even in the context of Moonbeam, but then create one application that's being presented to the user, so the user doesn't have to understand that they're interacting with all of these different specialized systems on the back end. And so that's kind of the thing that I think will be quite powerful, is almost like an AWS, but composed of these different decentralized services that provide developers these very powerful tools for building apps. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you guys about. I'll just throw some links up here. If people are interested in learning more about Moonbeam, our Discord is quite active. We have a very comprehensive doc site, and just our website and Twitter, of course, are good ways to follow what's happening in our community.
Thank you so much, Derek. And